5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, ignition, liftoff.
Welcome to the GHT Overland podcast, where we visit with overland travelers and explorers around the globe, learning from their experiences and enjoying their stories. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lisa. We are from a little city called Washougal in Washington State, known as the entrance to the Columbia River Gorge.
Today's featured guests are Jason and Chris from Outlaw Expedition. These guys completed an amazing expedition retracing the Oregon Trail. I'm especially excited because we share the same state of Oregon. So without further ado, welcome, guys.
Thank you. Thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah, glad to have you. Go ahead and jump in and fill us in on any blanks on that intro and give us a little glimpse into your background.
Sounds good. I'm Jason, team leader of OX Overland, used to be Oregon Trail Off-Road. And I guess you could say I'm the brainchild behind all this madness. So it started, 2013 now, so it's been a few years. But, you know, we started putting together a team and came up with this idea to retrace the Oregon Trail. And so realized that it hadn't been done before in the 4x4 overland fashion. And so we decided to take that under our wing and tackle that challenge. And so put together a team, and that's kind of what we did. We took 2.5 years to plan it and executed it in 44 days, and mostly without a hitch. There was a few bumps in the road, but it was
no problems.
Yeah, it was a great opportunity.
Yeah, it was. I'm Chris. I'm the survival expert and mechanic. I joined the team, jumped on the team, was it May of, I don't know, almost 2 years ago? Something like that. I met Jason through a mutual friend, and we've gone camping and doing some things together in the last 5 years. And we were up in Bend, I think it was, on a snow trip, and Jason asked me if I could show everybody a firecraft lesson, and so I did. And then a few weeks went by, and I knew about their trip, where they were going and everything else, and I was excited for them, but I was thinking, I had my own thing going. I was going to take my bicycle and start heading east, do a cross-country bicycle trip. And one day the phone rings, and it was Jason. And he said, "Hey, we've been talking. Do you want to jump on the team and go on the trip?" And I was absolutely ecstatic. So I dropped everything and jumped on board and helped him prep. And we left, 3 or 4 months after that.
Yeah. You were an invaluable commodity there at the end with the mechanics.
Well, thanks, man. It was good. It was because I'd been kind of bored, and like many veterans do, when you get bored, bad things happen. So it's really cool. Here, Chris, here's a 24-year-old truck. Here's what we got to do. See you in a bit.
Yep.
So it's been amazing. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Right on. So with learning on your intro, you guys retraced the Oregon Trail. Tell us, and I think, Jason, you mentioned a little bit, tell us when the idea came about, then how long it took you to prep for the trip.
Yeah, so how the idea came about, I guess like most good ideas, sitting in front of the television. Ironically, I was sitting there watching it was a Discovery Channel miniseries on the Yukon Gold Rush, and some of the guys were taking their gear up to the mining claims with wagons, and which just made me think about the Oregon Trail. And being that we're, Oregon natives, I mean, you grow up with that being a big part of the history of, your elementary. And so we were, at the time and actually the team kind of evolved from the first trip that we were going to do, but we were planning on taking a trip to Moab. And I knew I wanted to film at the time. I mean, it was like a handy cam and a GoPro kind of thing. And it was more of I wanted to just kind of document this trip. And we were kind of looking for I guess more me than anybody, but I was looking for more like a once in a lifetime, like, oh, that's a cool trip, something you could have a story about. And Moab seemed fun. I mean, it's always it's a off-road kind of mecca destination, but it didn't have a lot of like adventure in it, I guess. It wasn't like a, something novel. I don't know how to explain it, but it didn't have that romance to it, I guess. And so just because we were talking about the trip, I think I had been talking to some of the guys earlier that day, and I watched that show, and then, the wagons and the Oregon Trail, and I was just like, it popped in my head. I was like, well, what if anybody's ever retraced the Oregon Trail off-road? And so, and mind you, at this time we had no idea that the overlanding community even existed. So it was like we were just a bunch of guys just planning a trip. And at the time I had an F-150. One of the other guys had a Nissan Titan. Kobe had a big jacked up Ranger. And so we weren't overlanders, quote unquote. We were just a couple of guys looking for a trip. And so we were going to go off-roading and camping and whatever. And so that's kind of how it started. And so we were, I ended up talking to some of the other guys, and I remember thinking about the idea myself, and I was like, oh, this is just kind of crazy. Like, I mean, could anybody really ever do that or whatever? And when I looked online, I didn't see anything about anybody doing it off road, and so I was like, okay, well I'll just run it past the guys. If it's a stupid idea, I'll drop it, whatever. And when I brought it to some of the other guys, they were like, hey, that's a good idea. And so from there, it was just the idea, I kind of say sometimes, just kind of has a mind of its own, and it kind of goes where it's going to go. And when a good idea happens, it kind of snowballs and goes from there. But it was completely organic on our side. Chris said earlier, me and him started out overlanding, quote unquote, but we didn't really know what it was. We just tried to pack as much crap into our vehicles as we could and stay out as long as we could, I guess, is kind of how it went. But yeah, and then shortly after that, we, in doing the research for the Oregon Trail trip, we realized there's a whole community of people here that are into this overland.
So that's when you ran across the other overlanders. So did you ever find anybody, either during your research or during your trip, that has ever gone back and retraced the Oregon Trail in its entirety?
Oh yeah, not off road. Like in a vehicle.
They've done them in wagons.
Yeah, wagons, airplanes.
Okay. Yeah, so it's been done.
It's not,
Okay, airplanes is cheating.
Right.
I know, right?
I guess, but the guy who did it was Ezra Meeker. He was kind of the grandfather of the Oregon Trail because he actually came over on the Oregon Trail, and then because the Transcontinental Railway was introduced, the Oregon Trail being kind of recent history, I guess, at the time, people started forgetting about it, and the history was starting to get lost. And so he took it upon himself to retrace the Oregon Trail in Oxen, and he was 80-something or 70-something years.
Oh, wow. Do you know when he did that? Like what year?
Maybe teens to 20s, somewhere in there, I think.
20s, yeah.
And I could be totally wrong. I should look it up.
But he did retrace it in Oxen.
Yeah, he did. And he was pretty old when he did it. And then he did it another time in Oxen, and then once in a car, and then his last time was in an airplane. So that's bringing it all the way back around to the airplane.
Okay. So you're watching this TV show, Jason, and you come up with this idea. You run it past the guys, and they maybe it was a surprise to you, like, hey, man, that sounds like a pretty cool thing to do. So then how long did it take you to prep for that trip? Once you had that conversation, you're like, let's look into this and start making some plans. Yeah. From that time to the time you actually physically left to start the expedition, roughly what was that?
It's probably about 2.5 years, maybe a little over 2.5 years.
And Chris, were you involved in that whole process as well?
Not in the original 2.5. No, I came on like 6 months before we left for the Oregon Trail.
Okay.
Yeah.
It was just me and Kobe were the only original members at the time. So, and then, we have some people that have been involved the whole time, like on the back end, but they didn't go on the expedition. Jesse, he's one of the guys who help us with the production side of things. And then, Tank has been around for a long time, and he's kind of our overland consultant.
Okay, gotcha. So during this 2-year period, roughly, what were some of the biggest challenges that you faced in getting the trip ready to go? I don't know, maybe it was the rigs and mechanically making sure that they're sound, or making sure that the family and personal stuff at home are taken care of. What were some of those biggest challenges that you faced in getting ready?
It's always been the team, I think. The biggest challenge has always been the team. It's been a hard road with the team, and just finding people that mesh and, because it's all volunteer. And we all have different opinions on things and different, ways of doing things. And so it's always been, the biggest challenge has always been trying to find people that work together well and that you can kind of, handle a long expedition with, I guess. So, I mean, because the team, I mean, and it's still evolving. The team now is different from when we went on the expedition, and it's always evolving. People are always coming and going, and we're, it's just one of those things that, the hardest thing about it is how big of an undertaking it is. And, it sounds cool to be like, yeah, let's do this big trip, but then, the back end of things isn't as pretty and glamorous as the trip itself. You know what I mean? And so there's a lot of stuff on the back end of things and planning and, trying to figure out how to do things or whose rigs are going or how we handle, the financial burden of the trip itself that kind of, people, don't have the same opinions all the time. And so people go, some people have family obligations. Tank has always been a guy who's been, near and dear to our heart. And he's always been like a consultant for us. He's a long-time mechanic and as a profession, and he's been overlanding since he was a little kid, and so he's got a lot of good information. But just with his family situation, it wasn't feasible for him to actually go on the expedition. So there's all these like limitations to doing an expedition like this that has a way of kind of, I guess, weeding out the I wouldn't say the good or the bad, but just the people that are passionate about it and the people that are, had maybe a different idea of what it was in their head.
Yeah, and I can imagine you've got to get kind of a group of people together that, as you mentioned, are like-minded, that mesh well. So you probably have a bunch of A-type personalities that are driven to do things, but the opposite side of that is putting a bunch of A personalities together. They're all going to be pretty strong in their opinions, right? That's what it is. You got 4 A-type people in 2 trucks going 5,000 miles. Something's going to get broken. Yeah. That's just the way it goes. But, yeah, I mean, the interpersonal issues was by far our biggest obstacle on the trip. And I think a lot of people who've taken long trips would find that, yeah, that's a big deal. It's definitely, as the days go on, it gets tougher. So
we joked around and we always said, like, we spend more time together than we would with our wives on an average day. Yeah. And it was true.
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't get away from each other for 44 days.
So anything that you guys did do, or maybe that you would do different next time with, I don't know if you had, like, everybody had a specific role. So, Jason, if you're the team lead, did everybody else fall into place somewhere, like a chain of command kind of thing? Or how did that work for you? Or if you didn't do that, how would you do it, if you would, going on your next trip?
Yeah, that was the hardest thing, and that was the biggest. I mean, I'm not kind of like, I'm a general contractor, so I'm in my own business. So being a leader, I guess, isn't something that's foreign to me. But, when we started, Oregon Trail Off-Road, I guess at the time, it wasn't like there was no leader, so to speak. It was just kind of, I'd come up with the idea, but we were always kind of like, we're going to handle this as adults and we'll just diplomatically make decisions. Well, it became evident that that's not how humans really work at their potential. And so slowly it was always the person who had the most passion for it that ended up kind of rising to the top, I guess, as a leader. And that's kind of how it kind of happened. It was more organic than it was like, oh, I'm the leader here. It was just I had more of a passion for it than anybody else. And I was putting in, tons of hours trying to figure this all out. And it just kind of became an obsession for me. And so problem with that is I didn't really... And I'm not like the kind of guy who establishes himself. I'm the leader here, you know what I mean? So it wasn't something that was comfortable for me, number one. And, because of the way it evolved, it kind of didn't present itself that way, number two. But the problem with that is in a situation like that, much like the military, you really do need a strong leader, because if people are left to their own devices and they don't have clear expectations and clear goals, like things get kind of weird, I guess. I don't even know how to explain it, but different people have different expectations on like how things are supposed to run or what we're supposed to do, or the whole mess of everything that we went through. Everybody had a different expectation, and as a leader, I didn't do a very good job of setting expectations here. I mean, I did in a certain way, but I kind of did it in a way where it was like, here's kind of the outline. You guys can, you guys are all adults. You fill in the gaps, kind of a thing. Where I think in an expedition like that, you really need to have like, here's how we handle ourselves. Like if we're in this situation, or like, just going through and making sure everybody's on the same page with everything. Because if you don't, and that was, with some of the biggest issues we had is, just how we handled ourselves. Because, we didn't just take on an expedition, we took on a production as well. And it wasn't, we were all amateurs. None of us had done it professionally. I'd never, produced a documentary series or anything. It was just kind of something that we decided to do. And so we were all kind of learning on the go. And I think that was probably the biggest thing I learned as a leader is, like, you just need to establish the expectations so everybody's on the same page. And then everybody knows where they're supposed to be and what they're supposed to be doing. So
yep. So what does that look like for your next trip? How would you set that up for each team member?
Man, that's a long conversation.
Under total threat of punishment.
Yeah.
No,
there you go. Do it the military way, Chris.
Right.
Yeah,
perfect.
The irony is that's kind of the model that the military does it that way for a reason, I think, and to handle it that way is a little easier
because it works.
Yeah, because it works, and everybody jokes around how antiquated some of the systems are, but some of the core values of the military system are there because they work. As a leader, I also want people to be, I guess, invested in it and they have some ownership in it. And just me telling them what to do doesn't give them any ownership in it. And so I do want to be, the kind of leader that works with my guys and be like, okay, here's where we need to be. How do we get there? And let them kind of create the plan in between, but, oversee it in a way that, like, we know it's getting done and we're working on it together and everybody knows where we are. So I feel like it's a little bit more diplomatic in the way we're doing things, but it creates ownership in, the tasks that they're responsible for. And it helps, everybody be on the same page, I guess.
Yeah, true. Doing leadership, Jason, on a volunteer basis when there's no job on the line, or in the military where your, rank or life is on the line, that is one of the toughest things to do.
Yeah.
That's a tough thing.
Absolutely.
Hey, Chris, going back a little bit, because you jumped in somewhere about that 6-month mark before you guys left, and you're one of the mechanics and a survival expert. Any challenges that you saw with maybe the vehicles and making sure that everything was prepped and ready to go, and you felt comfortable with what you were working with?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. When I was not familiar with the Land Cruiser. When I jumped on board, I was more of a Jeep guy.
Okay.
I'd never owned a Jeep, but I was a Jeep fan because it's made in America, of course, figure. But
sure.
No, I know Jason had done his homework, so I had zero doubts as to that we'd be going with the absolute, the best stuff that we could be going with the budget allowed. So yeah, and to come in, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the 80 series Land Cruiser. You probably are. They're a wonderful machine, and I'm kind of a gearhead, and I know electronics really well. So to jump in and start working on them, I was just completely happy. They'd gotten probably 90% of the way there when I jumped on the team, and then we made some changes, but not a ton. Jason had prepped it as good as anybody could.
I really like the diversity you had in the different vehicles. Anything specific you found in vehicle selection that you're looking at for your next expedition?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Tell us about that.
Well, we're going to keep the Land Cruiser,
okay.
But we learned a lot. Like, Wyoming taught us all the shovels and everything on the top rack that look all pretty and cool. Those don't fly on the trail. They need to be tucked away because they'll get sheared off really quick. So we learned a ton of stuff about weight distribution and balance.
And not to bring a Ranger.
Yeah, and we brought a 20-some-odd-year-old Ford Ranger, and to give it its due, it did not strand us. It had some. The worst part about the Ranger was the front axle, that the 4-wheel drive system was just horrid, and we kept blowing out hubs for no reason. But other than that, the thing didn't use a drop of oil. It always got us to where we wanted to go. It did the job, and I think the Ranger's what got a lot of people into it who normally wouldn't, because the Ranger was it had a lift on it, and its locker, I really honestly think
leveled.
Oh, was it leveled?
Oh, I guess kind of.
He had blocks, yeah.
8-inch springs in the rear or something.
Yeah.
So what would you do different besides not taking the Ranger? what's going to be your next, if you were to set up your dream setup for your next expedition, what does that look like?
You want me to answer?
Yeah.
Okay. For me personally, the Land Cruiser would get a really, really good 4-inch, maybe to 6-inch lift, and I'm talking the one that's got brand new track bars, brand new links, all that. We would do that. I'd like to put a 350, an LT motor in the Land Cruiser, keep the transmission. Both that setup has dual batteries, and then the GX.
Oh yeah, we haven't even talked about the GX.
Yeah, we won't get into the GX, but
no, I mean we can. I just haven't talked about it.
Yeah, because the Land Cruiser in itself, I'll be really honest with you. To sum up the Land Cruiser, that truck on the entire, it had 200 and some odd thousand miles when we left.
No, 100. We turned 200 on the trip.
Okay, so it had just under 200,000 when we left, and everything that went wrong with that truck was the fault of a human and not the people that made it. I mean, we had a distributor. Yeah, just somebody spliced into the power wires to the distributor, and that was 4 or 5 days of us chasing stuff down. That wasn't Toyota's fault. The brakes, we had it overloaded. That wasn't Toyota's fault.
Overloaded.
Yeah, I mean, we beat the crap out of that thing, and it just did not budge at all. And if no human being had ever modified that in any way, shape, or form, we'd never have an issue with it.
Well, other than it being stock and maybe hitting a few things.
Yeah, I mean, we abused it. We were over-equipped and under-vehicled.
Yeah.
I mean, it was... Yeah, and the Ranger was the Ranger. It did fine. I mean,
It pushed it to its max. I mean, that's the thing with I think that was the biggest difference between the Land Cruiser and the Ranger was the fact that, like, no, they both did the trip. They both made it through. No big issues. I can't say that one had any more, issues than the other one did. But the difference being is the Ranger was really pushed to the max, whereas the Land Cruiser, I felt like, by the end of the trip, I guess by the end of the Oregon Trail, I really felt like, man, I wish I could have pushed this machine a little harder.
Yeah.
But, I mean, there was a lot of good, like, big lessons that we learned. Like Chris was just saying, like, weight distribution was one of the huge things because having never built an overland vehicle before, we didn't think about weight distribution, and it was more of a function thing, right? So we had, in the Land Cruiser, we had the driver. It was a 3-seater. We took one of the back seats out. So it was the driver, the passenger, we had the fridge, the fuel tank, the spare tire, and the roto packs on the driver's side. And on the passenger side, we had one passenger and the camera gear. And so, and then the jerry can and the traction jacks.
And not virtually nothing on that other
Yeah,
side.
so it was super driver heavy. And, not thinking about it, it was just like, if we keep everything on this side, then we've got a sleeping platform here if we need it, or if somebody gets hurt, we have a flat platform to put them on. But then that made everything be on the driver's side, which actually played the trail that we got the shovels knocked out that Chris was just talking about, we ended up, the high side being the passenger side, and, we were, real tipping. A few times it looked like we were going to go over on our side, but, so like weight distribution is something that and if you're doing local stuff, it doesn't really play a big part, because it was never something I ever noticed until we were actually on the trail for an extended period of time, and then I was like, this makes a big difference. And then just fatigue, because you're constantly like, favoring that one side, and like, there's something to be said about just like driver's fatigue, and having an easier car to drive kind of makes this long miles a little more manageable.
Okay. Good. So what's the one tool or piece of gear, and maybe Chris, you want to tackle this one, I'm not sure, that you value the most, something our listeners should unquestionably either have with them or definitely consider getting?
Oh, that's easy. Jason's got it right here in his pocket. It's the Leatherman.
Okay,
I know
perfect.
how to work for Leatherman. I'm not getting, I have no bonding to them at all, but that little stupid tool, I mean, we were asking for it every day. Hey, Jason, you got a Leatherman on you? Yeah, I'm tweaking something under the hood. Oh, yeah, Steve needs it for this, over that. I mean, and then we lost it a couple times, and then we found it.
Yeah. At one point, we had 2 of them out.
We had 2 of them out, and then we found the other one. So, yeah, I would say it's a Leatherman. And as far as overlanding goes, I can't think of one tool that was like the save-all, end-all, be-all.
I would say the winch.
The winch would probably be a close first, yeah, because, I mean, that really, winches save the day. That's what they do.
Yeah.
But there's, yeah.
Yeah, if you're talking recovery, I would say the winch.
For sure.
And people sometimes sacrifice, can I get the, traction mats or the kinetic rope instead of a winch? And it's like, you you can't sacrifice. And then, I always say, get a quality winch, because, the stuff that you want to save money on isn't the stuff that you're going to have to rely on later. So spend the money and get a solid winch. And, we have Warren, and Warren had been a good company. I've always, supported us. And so we like those. I mean, there's a lot of good winches out there, but don't sacrifice on something that you're going to rely on.
Did you guys use like the Max Trax or anything?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, don't get me started.
For traction mats?
We weren't super impressed with any of those types of things. And
okay.
You got to understand, our rig was 7,600 pounds or 72?
Yeah, about 74, 75.
7,400 pounds. So everything was maxed out, even those.
Yeah, well, and I mean, traction mats, I feel like have their place. I've used them in sand, and they work great in sand, and I feel like that's where they were developed, is in, over in Australia is that. And they have their place, I guess, but I've rarely been in a situation where I've pulled out my traction mats that I didn't also pull out my winch, and I just feel like listen, like there's all kinds of different styles of overlanding, and you have to think that ours is mostly based on function and reliability, because that's what we're trying to get from point A to point B. And so those kind of things, like, I'm just not going to pull out the traction mats just because I know my winch will work, and why pull out something that you may or may not work, But I mean, they do have their place, and I see videos all the time of
right tool for the right job.
Right, and 9 times out of 10, a winch is going to.
The winch always wins. Yeah. Max Trax only wins some of the time.
Yeah. So we're partnered up with Traction Jack, which is a great company, great product. We like it because, the hinge in the middle gives you a little bit more surface area and contact area. They're heavy. And, I feel like, let me preface that with this. If you had multiple sets, then I could see how they would be very helpful, because if you have multiple sets, the problem is 3 feet sometimes isn't enough to get the momentum or to try to float your truck over the snow or whatever.
Yep.
And so it's just not enough. If you had multiple sets, and I've seen them used in a row, and they seem to work pretty well, and I can see how that would work really well. But then again, you're carrying another, 3 or 4 sets, and that's, 40 pounds a piece or whatever. That's a lot of weight, so.
Talking about gear, I always think about how much extra stuff I tend to pack, because I tend to go over-prepared. What did you guys find that you originally packed with you and, you never used, you wouldn't take it again?
A lot of the camera gear we realized we didn't need. We sent 2 boxes of stuff back home.
I brought way too many clothes. I will admit that.
Yeah, you did.
I bought
clothes and camera gear.
Thinking, hey, we're getting towards the Tetons, but yeah, clothes and camera gear. I don't think of any of the tools, out of all the tools we brought, nothing really got in the way. We used, or could have potentially used, everything without question.
Being that this was something that we didn't know what overlanding was before this. Since the very, very beginning, we've always okay, so I had a F-150, and I don't know what the dry weight on an F-150 is. But when we weighed it, it was 11,500 pounds. And so it was so heavy. Oh my God. And we had everything in there, right? And so that's the way we started. And basically, kind of my mindset was, if we didn't use it, we'll leave it behind, if it wasn't essential to what we were doing. And so that's kind of how we did it. So by the time we got to the end, we really had the bare essentials. So there wasn't too much that we needed, that we didn't have, or that we had to get rid of. A lot of it was production and camera gear, I felt like, because that was something that was, we were still learning. And so when we got out there, we realized we don't really need this or that.
Well, there were potential tools for sure that we never used, but we would bring again for sure.
Yeah, tools are different.
32 or 51 millimeter lug nut for the front axles of LC, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So if you were to pick along your expedition with the Oregon Trail, if you were to pick maybe 2 or 3 spots that were your favorite, tell us about what maybe those were. I know towards the end of your trip, there may not have been as many, or maybe the Ozarks were, but along the Oregon Trail itself, are there maybe 2 or 3 spots you could pick out that really stood out to you?
Yeah, we were still in Oregon, in the eastern Oregon, and we were in the desert, and then we somehow got into some mountainous areas with some trees, and that was where we camped, Jason, by that little creek. And we were still in Oregon. That was a cool one. But remember the one on Instagram, the washout in Wyoming, that Kobe was just loving it when they all went up on the hill. You remember that place?
Oh yeah. With the like moon looking.
Yeah, it was like moon. It was like Mars. It's like
Yeah,
the surface of Mars.
sandstone.
So I would say that Oregon one and the surface of Mars, and then the Ozarks.
Yeah,
Ozarks forever.
I think. Well, I mean, to me, the things that stand out are like the tough terrain. So for me, it was like the 3 spots that stand out to me the most was 2 in Idaho, the hilltop that we hit.
Yeah, that was
so we hit. It was so crazy because we were trying to get. I mean, you have to understand, we planned our own route, so we didn't know it was there until we actually got there. And so most of it was a mystery, whether it went through or not. It looked like it went through on the map, but, we didn't know what we were getting into until we got there. And so we got to this one place where it was like kind of an OHV kind of area. I don't know if it's an actual OHV, but there was some camp spots up there.
Yeah.
And I think what we were on was just a 4-wheel trail, and it basically it skirted the ridge of this, I wouldn't call it a mountain range, but they were kind of like...
We were 9,000 feet.
Well, yeah, but we were high elevation anyways. We're in Idaho, right?
Yeah, it was 4,000 at ground level.
But anyways, it was basically skirting along the ridge of these mountains. And like always, you can't tell by the video, but, it basically on both sides of it, if you rolled, you'd roll down several hundred yards before you... more?
A couple thousand feet. Yeah, and it was a scree slope. It was this scree, rocky... Just you take one step and 2 tons of rock start sliding down the side.
Yeah, and we were above like the tree elevation, right?
Yeah,
because
way above the tree line.
Yeah. So I mean, there was no trees up there to stop you, so you just kind of roll. So there was you guys all stayed behind, and I ran up ahead, and I had to run up probably a mile and a half ahead to just see if we could actually get through. And what ended up happening is it would have been pretty crazy to try to turn around and go back down because we had just gone up this hill, and that was. I mean, I don't even know what the incline was, but I mean, it was the steepest hill that we went up. And I just remember like looking at the sky, but it was one of those situations where there wasn't a lot of room to turn around. And so we kind of had to keep going, but we didn't know if it went all the way through. So we ended up finding a path through, and I was a mile and a half ahead. And I think it was scarier for me because I was listening to you guys on the radio, not knowing what was going on.
Zach and I were going down.
Yeah, and so basically I scouted ahead and said, if you guys can come through here. I was like, but you guys, I told you guys, I was like, you guys need to decide for yourselves if you want to do this. Because the problem is it's not very gnarly terrain. A lot of it was off camber. But if something does happen...
It's catastrophic.
Yeah, somebody's going to die.
Great stories, jammed packed with experience and useful information. This episode of GHT Overland with OX Overland is our longer format interview, so we split these into 2 episodes for your downloading pleasure. Don't worry, part 2 is available now. In the next episode, Jason and Chris finish telling us about the scree slope and more great information you're going to want to learn from. Now, before you race over to the second half, it would mean the world to us, and I mean the entire globe if you'd give us a 5-star review. Like it, do whatever is needed to give GHT Overland some love, so we may reach as many overlanders as possible. Passing on priceless experience, knowledge, and stories of overlanders doing good in the world. Thank you, and we will see you over on part 2. What are you waiting for? Go give us some podcast love and download part 2. Bye.